My name is William Davis, and I'm 71 years old, sitting here in my empty apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at a photograph of my grandson that I'm no longer allowed to touch, hold, or even be in the same room with. 6 months ago, I was arrested by 3 police officers in front of my neighbors, handcuffed like a common criminal, and charged with inappropriate contact with a minor. That minor was my own 5-year-old grandson, little Tommy, and my crime was giving him a hug when he fell down and started crying. Before I tell you how one moment of grandfatherly love destroyed my entire life and turned me into a registered offender who can't even attend family gatherings, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments, because what happened to me could happen to any grandparent in America. Subscribe now, because this story will show you how quickly your own family can turn against you and destroy everything you hold dear. For 68 years, I lived a clean life. I served in the Army for 12 years, worked as a maintenance supervisor at a hospital for 35 years, paid my taxes, never even got a speeding ticket. I was married to my beautiful wife, Sarah, for 42 years, until cancer took her from me 3 years ago. We raised 2 children, Michael and Rebecca, and I thought I had done everything right as a father and husband. When Sarah died, Michael and his wife, Jennifer, moved from California back to Phoenix to be closer to me. They said they were worried about me living alone, wanted to make sure I was okay. I was grateful for their concern, grateful to have my son and daughter-in-law nearby, and especially grateful to be close to my grandson, Tommy, who was just 2 years old at the time. Tommy became the light of my life after Sarah passed away. That little boy with his bright blue eyes and infectious giggle was the only thing that could make me smile during those dark months of grief. I would babysit him when Michael and Jennifer went out, take him to the park, read him bedtime stories. He called me Papa Bill, and hearing that sweet little voice say my name was better than any medicine the doctors could have given me for my depression. Jennifer seemed fine with our relationship at first. She would bring Tommy over for visits, let me take him for walks around the neighborhood, even asked me to watch him overnight sometimes when she and Michael had date nights. I thought we had a good relationship. Thought she appreciated having a grandfather who was so involved in Tommy's life. But I started noticing changes in Jennifer's behavior about a year after they moved back to Phoenix. She became more protective of Tommy, more suspicious of everyone around him. She started limiting his interactions with other children at the playground, became paranoid about strangers, and began questioning everything Tommy told her about his day. I learned later that Jennifer had been reading about child abuse online, watching documentaries about predators, and had become convinced that danger lurked everywhere. She started seeing threats where none existed, interpreting innocent interactions as potentially harmful. Michael tried to reassure her, but Jennifer's fears only grew stronger over time. The incident that changed everything happened on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in October. Michael and Jennifer had come over to my apartment for our weekly family dinner. Tommy was playing in my living room with some toys I kept there specifically for his visits. He was running around, full of energy like any 5-year-old, when he tripped over the leg of my coffee table and fell hard on his knee. The sound he made when he hit the floor broke my heart. It was that sharp, painful cry that children make when they're really hurt, not just startled. Tommy was sitting on the floor, holding his knee, tears streaming down his little face, looking around for comfort. Jennifer was in the kitchen helping with dinner, and Michael was outside on my balcony making a phone call. Without thinking, I did what any loving grandfather would do. I knelt down beside Tommy, gently examined his knee to make sure nothing was broken, and then pulled him into my arms to comfort him. I held him close, rubbed his back, and whispered that everything's going to be okay, that Papa Bill was here and would take care of him. Tommy's crying gradually subsided as I held him. He snuggled against my chest, his little arms around my neck, trusted me completely to make him feel better. It was such a natural, innocent moment of comfort between a grandfather and his injured grandson. I had done the same thing hundreds of times before without anyone thinking twice about it. But when Jennifer came out of the kitchen and saw me holding Tommy, something in her expression changed. Instead of thanking me for comforting her son, instead of asking if he was okay, she rushed over and immediately pulled Tommy away from me. Her face was filled with suspicion and anger as she demanded to know what happened, why I was holding him that way. I explained that Tommy had fallen and hurt his knee, that I was just comforting him like I always did. But Jennifer wasn't listening to my explanation. She was examining Tommy, asking him questions about what Papa Bill had done, where I had touched him. The poor child was confused by his mother's intense questioning. Didn't understand why she was so upset. Michael came in from the balcony and tried to calm his wife down, telling her that she was overreacting, that I had obviously just been helping Tommy with his fall. But Jennifer was beyond reason at that point. She picked up Tommy and announced that they were leaving immediately, that she wasn't comfortable with the situation. I watched helplessly as my family left my apartment in tension and anger. Michael looked back at me with an apologetic expression, but he followed his wife and son out the door. I stood there in my empty living room, completely bewildered by what just happened, unable to understand how an act of love and comfort had somehow become suspicious. The next few days were terrible. I called Michael repeatedly, trying to arrange another visit with Tommy, but Jennifer refused to bring him over. She told Michael that she needed time to think, that she was uncomfortable with how I had been touching Tommy. When Michael tried to defend me, she became hysterical, accusing him of not protecting his son. I thought this was just a temporary misunderstanding, that Jennifer would come to her senses and realize how ridiculous her suspicions were. I believed that my 40 years of being a loving father and 3 years of being a devoted grandfather would speak for themselves. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the incident, I was awakened at 6 a.m. by loud pounding on my apartment door. When I opened it, still in my pajamas and completely confused, I found 3 police officers standing in the hallway. One of them asked if I was William Davis, and when I confirmed my identity, they informed me that I was under arrest for inappropriate contact with a minor. The next few hours were the most humiliating and terrifying of my entire life. I was handcuffed in front of my neighbors, placed in the back of a police car like a criminal, and taken to the station for questioning. The detective who interviewed me explained that they had received a report of suspected child abuse, that a mother had come forward with concerns about inappropriate touching. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain about the fall, about the innocent hug, about my relationship with Tommy. But the detective's questions became increasingly aggressive and suspicious. They wanted to know about other times I'd been alone with Tommy, about whether I had ever bathed him or helped him get dressed, about whether there had been any other instance of physical contact. Every innocent interaction I had ever had with my grandson was suddenly being viewed through a lens of suspicion. The bedtime stories I had read to him, the times I had helped him use the bathroom, the hugs and kisses I had given him were all being reinterpreted as potential evidence of abuse. It was like living in a nightmare where love was being twisted into something evil. Michael came to the police station when he heard about my arrest. I could see the conflict in his eyes, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his knowledge of his father's character. He posted my bail and drove me home in painful silence. When I tried to explain what had really happened, he told me that Jennifer was convinced something inappropriate had occurred, that she had consulted with a child psychologist who supported her concerns. The legal proceedings that followed were a marathon of humiliation and heartbreak. Jennifer had convinced several of Tommy's teachers and babysitters to testify about changes they had supposedly noticed in his behavior. A child psychologist interviewed Tommy multiple times, leading him with questions until the confused little boy gave answers that could be interpreted as supporting his mother's accusations. My lawyer tried to fight the charges, presenting evidence of my spotless record, character witnesses who testified to my integrity, and expert testimony about the innocent nature of grandparent-grandchild physical affection. But the damage had already been done. In today's climate of heightened awareness about child abuse, any accusation, no matter how unfounded, carries enormous weight. The worst part was watching my relationship with Michael deteriorate as the case progressed. The pressure from Jennifer to choose between his wife and his father became unbearable. She threatened to leave him and take Tommy if he continued to support me. She painted me as a dangerous predator who had fooled everyone for years, who could no longer be trusted around children. Michael tried to remain neutral at first, but as the legal battle intensified and the community gossip spread, he began to pull away from me. He stopped visiting, stopped taking my calls, and eventually told me that he needed to focus on protecting his family. The son I had raised and loved was now treating me like a stranger, like a threat to be avoided. The court case dragged on for months. Even though the prosecutor couldn't prove any actual abuse had occurred, they argued that my behavior showed a pattern of inappropriate boundary crossing with a minor. The judge, clearly uncomfortable with the lack of concrete evidence, but unwilling to dismiss the concerns of protective mother, decided on a compromise that destroyed my life. I was given a suspended sentence and placed on probation with a restraining order that prohibited me from having any contact with Tommy. I was required to attend counseling sessions for sexual offenders, register with the local authorities, and stay away from places where children congregated. In the eyes of the law in my community, I had become a registered offender based on a hug I gave my injured grandson. The social consequences were immediate and devastating. My neighbors avoided me, crossing the street when they saw me coming. The children in my apartment complex were no longer allowed to play near my unit. Former colleagues from the hospital heard about my case and stopped speaking to me. My church asked me not to attend services anymore because of the children's programs held there. Living as a registered offender in a small community is a special kind of hell. Every time I left my apartment, I felt the eyes of suspicion following me. Parents would grab their children and move away when they saw me in stores. Former friends pretended not to recognize me. I became a pariah, isolated and shunned by the very community I had served faithfully for decades. The worst part was a complete loss of my grandson. Tommy, now 6 years old, had been told that Papa Bill was sick and couldn't see him anymore. Jennifer had moved the family to a different part of the city, changed Tommy's school, and made sure there was no chance of accidental contact between us. I went from being the most important person in that little boy's life to being completely erased from his existence. Michael occasionally sent me updates about Tommy through text messages, but even those stopped after Jennifer discovered them. My son was forced to choose between his father and his family, and understandably, he chose his family. I couldn't blame him for protecting his wife and child, but it didn't make the abandonment any less painful. Months passed in isolation and despair. I considered moving to a different city, starting over where no one knew my story. But at 71 years old, with limited resources and no family support, the idea of rebuilding my life somewhere else seemed impossible. I was trapped in Phoenix, branded as a predator, cut off from the only family I had left. The counseling sessions I was required to attend were particularly humiliating. I sat in group meetings with men who had committed actual crimes against children, listening to their stories of real abuse while maintaining my innocence about an act of grandfatherly love. The counselor treated me with the same suspicion and disapproval as the genuine offenders, refusing to acknowledge that I might be different from the others. But then, something unexpected happened that would change the trajectory of my story. One evening in March, about 6 months after my conviction, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It was Dr. Patricia Martinez, a child psychologist who had worked at the hospital during my time there as a maintenance supervisor. Dr. Martinez had heard about my case through mutual acquaintances and was disturbed by what she learned. As someone who specialized in actual child abuse cases, she recognized the red flags of a false accusation. She had seen too many cases where well-meaning but misguided parents had misinterpreted innocent interactions as signs of abuse. Dr. Martinez offered to review my case files and provide a professional opinion about the validity of the accusations against me. She explained that she had been working with a legal advocacy group that helped people who had been falsely accused of child abuse, particularly elderly individuals who had been caught in hysteria of overzealous protection. Working with Dr. Martinez and the advocacy group, we began to build a case for my innocence based on the evidence that had been overlooked during the original trial. Dr. Martinez reviewed the interview tapes with Tommy and identified numerous leading questions and improper techniques that had been used to elicit responses from a confused child. She also discovered that Jennifer had a history of anxiety and paranoia that predated my case, including incidents where she had made unfounded accusations against teachers and babysitters. This pattern of behavior suggested that Jennifer's fears were based on her own psychological issues rather than any real threat to her son. The advocacy group connected me with a new lawyer who specialized in overturning wrongful convictions in child abuse cases. This attorney had successfully helped dozens of people who had been falsely accused, including several grandparents who had been caught in similar situations. As we prepared to file an appeal, something even more significant happened. Michael, who had been struggling with guilt and doubt about his father's guilt, finally found the courage to challenge his wife's version of events. He had been doing his own research into false accusations and began to see the holes in the case against me. The breaking point came when Jennifer accused Tommy's new teacher of inappropriate behavior based on nothing more than the teacher giving Tommy a congratulatory hug for good work. Michael realized that his wife's paranoia was escalating and that innocent people were being hurt by her unfounded fears. Michael secretly contacted my new legal team and provided them with information about Jennifer's psychological history and her pattern of making false accusations. He also revealed that Tommy had been asking about Papa Bill constantly, confused about why he couldn't see his grandfather anymore, showing signs of emotional distress from a forced separation. The appeal process took several more months, but eventually, we were able to present compelling evidence that I had been wrongfully convicted. Dr. Martinez's expert testimony about the flawed investigation and Jennifer's psychological issues, combined with Michael's testimony about his wife's pattern of false accusations, convinced the court to overturn my conviction. The restraining order was lifted, my name was removed from the offender registry, and I was officially exonerated of all charges. The judge issued a formal apology for the miscarriage of justice and criticized the original investigation for its failure to properly evaluate the evidence. But the real miracle came when Michael brought Tommy to see me for the first time in over a year. The little boy, now 7 years old, ran into my arms with the same trust and love he had always shown me. He didn't understand all the legal complexities of what had happened, but he knew that Papa Bill was back in his life, and that was all that mattered to him. Michael and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. He has filed for divorce from Jennifer, who refused to accept the court's decision and continues to maintain that I am dangerous. Tommy will be living primarily with his father, which means I could be a part of his life again without the constant threat of false accusations. The experience has changed me profoundly. I've learned that innocence is not always enough to protect you from false accusations, that families can be destroyed by unfounded fears, and that the justice system can fail even well-meaning people. But I've also learned that truth has a way of emerging, that there are people willing to fight for justice, and that love between a grandfather and grandson can survive even the worst circumstances. Today, I'm not just a grandfather again. I'm an advocate for others who have been falsely accused of child abuse. I work with Dr. Martinez's organization to help identify and overturn wrongful convictions. I speak at conferences about the dangers of rushing to judgment and the importance of proper investigation techniques in child abuse cases. My story has a happy ending, but there are many others who are still trapped in the nightmare of false accusations. If you're listening to this and you've been wrongfully accused, don't give up hope. There are people who will fight for you, experts who can help prove your innocence, and legal organizations dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions. And if you're a parent listening to this, please remember that protecting children is important, but so is protecting innocent people from false accusations. Not every interaction between an adult and a child is suspicious. Sometimes a hug is just a hug, a moment of comfort between people who love each other. That's my story. How a simple act of grandfatherly love almost destroyed my life, but how truth and justice eventually prevailed. Sometimes the system fails us, but sometimes it also saves us. And sometimes miracles really do happen.